to this event tonight marking the publication of Stefan Carter's memoir with the Azrieli Foundation, A Symphony of Remembrance. Tonight, we are also here to celebrate Stefan of blessed memory, his astonishing story, his accomplishments, and his important contributions to our community and indeed to our province. Before I continue, I would like to acknowledge that the Jewish Heritage Center is located on Indigenous ancestral lands on Treaty 1 territory. The Red River Valley is also the birthplace of the Métis. We acknowledge that our water comes from Shoal Lake and are grateful to the First Nations who care for that water. We affirm that our commitment to never forget must also include confronting attempts to destroy Indigenous culture and nationhood and condemning attempts to deny that historical reality. A gentle and kind soul and a brilliant man, Stefan dazzled everyone who met him, including me. And despite his tragic early experiences during the Shoah and the tremendous loss he suffered, Stefan was determined to begin life anew, reaching for the stars. Born in Warsaw in 1928, Stefan and his family faced increasing persecution after the German invasion of Poland in September 1939. They were forced to move into the Warsaw Ghetto the following year. Despite the ghetto's restrictive and horrific living conditions, Stefan continued his education by attending secret school lectures and music concerts. On September 6, 1942, Stefan's mother was separated from him during a roundup and deported to the Treblinka killing center. Stefan escaped the ghetto that same year with help from his beloved cousins, and he spent 2 years in hiding with false papers outside the ghetto walls. In 1946, Stefan went to a displaced persons camp in Munich, Germany, with his aunt Paula and his uncle Edmund to join his cousin Zidek, who were his only surviving relatives. Stefan was sponsored by the family of a Canadian nurse, Etta Brenner, who worked for the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Agency in Germany, and he immigrated to Winnipeg in 1948. He graduated from medical school at the University of Manitoba, at the top of his class, and did fellowships at Columbia University in New York and the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. He was the director of the vascular lab at St. Boniface Hospital in Winnipeg for decades, with a multitude of leading-edge research, book, and chapter publications in the field of vascular medicine. And he spent over 40 years on staff at the Faculty of Medicine. Stefan assisted in the province's first open heart surgery in 1959. He and his wife, Emily, raised their sons, Joel and Andrew, in Winnipeg. And Andrew is with us tonight, and you'll be hearing from him later on in the program. Throughout his life, Stefan lectured and presented to thousands of students and adults alike on the horrors of the Holocaust with his first-hand accounts. A particularly moving moment took place in 2016 when Stefan shared his story at a commemoration of the Rwandan genocide against the Tutsi. Stefan described his own wartime experience when his curved nose had endangered him and how he had undergone surgery in order to make him look, quote, less Jewish. A Rwandan survivor who was present told the audience that during the genocide, many Tutsis attempted to stuff tissue up their nostrils in an effort to make their noses look more like that of the Hutu, which are broader. Many Rwandans were struck by the convergence of the two stories, and one remarked that when Carter spoke, he forgot that Stefan was white. Stefan was a strong advocate for Holocaust education in Winnipeg and was an important member of the Holocaust Awareness Committee dating back to the 1980s. He was also a longtime badminton player and classical music aficionado, and his book, Mozart, A Meditation on His Life and Mysterious Death, was published in 2006. On a personal level, I was honored to be Stefan's friend. I treasure the memory of our many conversations and visits over lunch and tea, and I will really miss him. Stefan left us on February 8th of this year at the age of 95. May his memory always be for a blessing. And now it is my pleasure to turn over the microphone to Ariel Berger, who is the managing editor of the Azrieli Foundation Survivor Memoirs program.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. On behalf of the Azrieli Foundation's Holocaust Survivor Memoirs program, welcome to the book launch of A Symphony of Remembrance and the life celebration of Stefan Carter. Thank you so much to Bell and the Jewish Heritage Center for welcoming me and hosting us all. It's wonderful to come together in person to honor Stefan and this new edition of his memoir. I never had the privilege of meeting Stefan in person like so many of you here tonight. When I first spoke with him last spring, we talked about the possibility of a new edition of his memoir. He was interested in our program and in ensuring his story lived on. And that is really what our Memoirs program is all about. Part of the power of storytelling is that in sharing a personal story, you can hold on to the memory of that person. And in keeping a memory alive, you also prevent a kind of second death, the death that comes after the physical one, the death that comes when a person or event is forgotten. We are honored to have published Stefan's story in this new edition, honored to be giving it a second life, and ensuring that Stefan's experiences are never forgotten. This evening, it is fitting that we are launching Stefan's memoir on Yom HaShoah and commemorating the 80th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Reading Stefan's memoir, I learned such a wealth of information on what life was like for him and his family in pre-war Warsaw. As you will read in the brand new introduction by scholar Katarzyna Persson, the majority of Jews in Warsaw were observant and organized their daily lives around Judaism, while others were secular and defined themselves as Jews based on shared history, ancestry, and customs. Stefan and his family were part of a small, assimilated community steeped in Polish culture. Part of the strength of our Memoirs program is that we believe it is so important for readers to learn about the rich, diverse history of Jewish life in Europe, to acknowledge the people who lived ordinary lives before those lives were disrupted by war, by persecution, by genocide. Each of the stories we publish recount the unique experiences of individuals, the lives they had before the war, the friends and family and culture they lost during the Nazi regime, the experiences they suffered through to survive the Holocaust, and how they renewed their lives in its aftermath. And it is these individual stories that must be told if we are to know the event that was the Holocaust. The Azrieli Foundation's Holocaust Survivor Memoirs program has been collecting the memoirs and diaries written by survivors of the Holocaust who came to Canada since 2005. With Stefan's memoir, we have now published the stories of 123 survivors from across Canada. After an in-depth research and editorial process, we published the memoirs in English and afterwards translate many into French. All of our books are offered free of charge to schools and universities across Canada, and they are for sale globally. Our education team works bilingually in every province and territory, both virtually and in person, to support and train teachers to take on the enormous task of teaching today's youth about the Holocaust. We train teachers to understand the power of memoir, of approaching history one story at a time. Stefan's story will be part of a new education program on the Warsaw Ghetto, and his story also complements our newest online exhibit called Education Disrupted, which you can access on our website. Stefan's commitment to his education during the Holocaust was an act of resistance, from studying in secret in the Warsaw Ghetto to studying while in hiding, reading, and writing essays. It's truly incredible. And his determination to rebuild his life after the Holocaust, focusing on both his career and also being involved and engaged in Holocaust education, is inspiring. Stefan's words have so much to teach the next generations. It is our privilege to include his story in our collection, and we will always ensure that it is read by students. And I'd now like to welcome Stefan's son, Joel, to the stage. Thank you.
So there was supposed to be two of us here, myself and my brother Andrew. And there's one sibling that's known more for his flair, flamboyance, and drama, although some of my friends might argue. So of course, Andrew, would have loved to have been here, but. And he was okay with me sharing this as yesterday as he was boarding the plane from Minneapolis to be here yesterday and, to fly into Winnipeg. He had what he would describe as a swoon on the jet bridge just prior to getting on the plane. So, medical professionals have another name for what happened, and so did the EMTs and the first responders and all sorts of folks so his swoon is being taken care of at one of the best hospitals in Minneapolis, and he's okay. But he wanted to send his regrets, and he was so pissed off that he couldn't be here. But safety first, and I know, my dad and my mom would have said, you need to just be taking care of health and whatnot is the most important thing. And so he's doing well, he's going to be okay, but a pretty dramatic swoon. And he just wanted to say that during his time, knowing how successful that this book launch was anticipated to be, that he was already working on the sequel, A Symphony of Badminton. And if that goes well, then I'll work on the trilogy, because as some of you know, in our Carter family tradition, who were here for when my mom died, we had a book launch just on the other side, that maybe I'll add a trilogy. I hopefully have a little more time to work on that, maybe something to the effect of the art and zen of badminton maintenance, whatnot. So. At some point, I'm going to need like a little selfie so Andrew can see just, how many people have turned out to honor our dad. And he gave me a few pointers and things that he wanted me to share. He said that for sure, because Joel, you take care of this, because we'd like to thank Bell and the Jewish Heritage Center of Western Canada for hosting this event. It's for my dad, this just goes over so much better, knowing how our family has been, to have friends and family, people honoring, than a more formal funeral and life celebration. I'd like to thank Jody Spielberg and Ariel, manager, director of the Azrieli Foundation, for all the work and for publishing him. Some of the times that I've seen him the most happiest, and himself and most animated, because he's a pretty contained kind of fellow, as being when he's doing the book launches or when he's getting awards from Badminton Canada, Badminton Manitoba. So he would have loved to have been here to do his own book signings and whatnot. So it's interesting for me to hear about this amazing fellow who was my dad, and my brother's dad, of course, and I'll share a few stories and maybe a few things in the in the book. He was quite the fellow. I would say growing up, knowing that we were Jewish. Growing up Jewish for me meant sort of in the shadow of the Holocaust, since we weren't so, engaged in the Jewish community, and maybe that's in the shadow of the Holocaust, and also maybe one of the reasons why he survived in some ways, that his parents in Poland, were Orthodox, were not Orthodox or conservative, and made decisions that allowed him to survive, and for me and my brother to be here, and for his career. And I remember pretty early on in maybe elementary school, there was a question that came about in one of the classrooms about who heroes were, and the thought that immediately came to mind when I was so young was the folks like Churchill or John F. Kennedy, and there was another early classmate who said, well, my dad. And I sort of looked and I wondered, I thought, that's a good answer. And for me, personally, to understand his story, it wasn't probably till decades later that I really understood his story and what an amazing fellow he was and what he survived, Years ago, my brother went with my dad to Poland and to do the Holocaust stuff, to go on those trips. And he went first. He always tells me who was first to Poland. He always reminds me, first to Poland. Andrew Carter, first to Poland with our dad, And he had these amazing experiences with my dad, and I was a little jealous, but I also thought, too, I probably wasn't ready to go there. Because, in the shadow of the Holocaust, it's so painful to be Jewish. And years later, my dad and I, ended up going. It was my time. There's a saying I say when I give talks, and maybe it makes sense here, or maybe for my brother, whatever, that whoever shows up are the right people to be there. Whenever we start, it's always the right time. Whatever happens is the only thing that could have happened, and when it's over, it's over. And so it was my time with my dad. It was an amazing trip to Poland. Should write a book about it. With the old timer, still willing to travel at that time, And there were, moments that were, life sometimes comes full circle, and you get to stand in a place and you find healing, I remember in the city of Krakow, there was a restaurant called the Peasant's Grub, and we sat down to have whatever Polish cuisine and blintzes, knishes, whatever, and some beer with cherry vodka sort of spun down. And there was this little band playing in the corner, and they were playing this music. And my dad got up, not one to sort of, get up so much, but he asked, to play one of the tunes that was sort of pre-war around the time when he was growing up. And the band knew this, and they played this amazing tune, and I could just see my dad just back, in this time before, just floating back. And this time it was an amazing moment. And then walking the streets of Warsaw, where his house was. going to the park where it's the main park in Warsaw where Chopin is honored and where his father would take him. And then there was a restaurant in the main square where his dad took him when he was a little boy for some typical hot Polish mead wine, you know. So I took my dad to that restaurant to have some hot Polish mead wine, you know. And so we'd do the Polish stuff, and then we'd do the Holocaust stuff, and we'd go to the Umschlagplatz, you know, the site of selection, you know, when he last saw his mom, you know, and the journey to Treblinka, you know, where I found things that, you know, changed my relationship with being Jewish, you know. Visiting Auschwitz with my dad. You know, there were two camps, you know, the older camp, which was the barracks that you see with that freedom through work, you know, and then there was Birkenau, you know. And, you know, not brought up with a formal Jewish education. You know, I remember sitting in the Azrieli barracks with my dad, and there was no one around. And we're just sitting in the center, and there was this small little memorial, this hole in the floor with rocks and a few things, and on the wall there was some Polish and some Hebrew that I couldn't read, and my father translated it for me, you know, from the Polish. You know, he said, and the words were that the blood of your brother calls up from the earth. You know, and for me, you know, searching for my tribe, you know, that was one of the first times knowing that this was my story in a very deep way, that this was my people. Because before it was just too painful. I remember sitting with my dad in that place, and you know, we wouldn't have these big esoteric conversations. He was so much of a scientist, you know, and so much thinking about things, you know. But I asked my dad this question, and I asked him, so Dad, what do you think it means to be Jewish? You know, and he gave me probably the most important answer that anyone in my life, better than any rabbis, would have given me. You know, and he said something to the effect that, you know, the Jews since the beginning of time have always contributed to the well-being of mankind in so many fields, you know, to betterment, you know, humanity and whatnot, you know. And then he said, in spite of everything, I have no regrets. That I have no regrets. And I thought, what an amazing thing. Knowing what he suffered through and the selections and, you know, being orphaned, that he had no regrets. You know, that was probably the most important thing that I ever heard. So thanks, Dad, for that. I'll say after that, we had this adventure where we, I can't remember the name, but there's a journey where you go from Auschwitz and travel the tracks to Birkenau. You do the walk. I can't remember what the name of the walk, but that's what a lot of Jewish kids and whatnot, you walk to Birkenau down the tracks. And so my dad and I started, and we got lost. You know, I think he was in his 70s, and we're sort of trudging around these industrial parks and Auschwitz, you know, and we got lost, and like, where the hell is that death camp? We couldn't find it. You know, we're going through industrial parks, under fences, just trying to break in. Where is that camp? You know, and we eventually got there, and my dad had this, you know, interesting experience, as he would say. You know, to be in these places, it's surreal. But he sort of went off on his own, and by that time he was sort of into a little bit of yoga and whatnot, and he did so much of this mindfulness stuff, later on. But he sort of wandered off on the loading dock, and he sort of went off by himself and just was sort of walking around, and gave him, a number of minutes, and he came back to me, and he was excited. He sort of would have one of those looks. My kids say that's a Grandpa Stefan look. He was a little excited, like something had happened. And he said he didn't really have the words to sort of explain it, But he said he was just walking there, and he was at sort of peace and whatnot, and he had this sense of calm and peace and everything else, And I said to him, so Dad, when was the last time you were on a, loading dock? And he said September, whatever, 1943, when he last saw his mom. And at that moment, the sun came out. And it was the first time that the sun had come out since we had arrived in Poland. Sort of amazing, for him to find some peace and, and healing, and sort of this life lesson of sometimes you have to go back to those painful places and stand there. And just be open to experiences and whatnot, But he was quite apart from everything, quite the interesting fellow to have as a dad, and to, some of the things where he probably survived in and of himself, inside himself, for years during those formative years, and the routines that became so important for him to just survive and to do the exercises when he was in hiding and whatnot. That in some ways there's this balance that kept him sane back then, and also, I saw these same routines about how rigid he was in terms of his behaviors and routines even into his 90s, and how I was just going for a walk with one of my good friends, Derek, today, and we'd often say down the Wellington Crescent, where for those people who might have seen him running years and years ago wondering if he was okay, he was okay, But it was always a joke when I'd go out for a little jog with him, hey, Dad, can we go around the tree the other way? And he just couldn't cope with that, And how much of an intellectual he was. My mother would often joke that when he was going to propose to her, Emily, that it took about 30 or 40 minutes, and she was wondering, where is this going, or whatnot, Why don't I read a couple of things, and then something else might come to mind about this funny fellow, our dad, who was also my university professor, and I think I referenced that in one of the obituaries. It was sort of, you never wanted to skip out on Dad's lecture or punt the course, right? Right, Jim? You lose style points for that. But in reference to the Holocaust and everything, and how much he dedicated his life to human rights, and how pleased he was about, the Museum of Human Rights. I think this is what my brother had asked me to read. He said that, I think it's essential to study, together with the Holocaust, many other catastrophes, genocides, and large-scale injustices, which continue to occur while the world remains largely indifferent. Extreme human suffering must be acknowledged, and there is no need for competition for martyrdom. Even though the Holocaust was unique in the extent and scientific methods that the highly cultured Nazism used, The deaths and suffering of many millions of the victims of other genocides are an equally essential ingredient of our collective human remembrance and important in the common fight for freedom from discrimination and injustice. I think that's the core of what he thought, and based from what the experience was. And to be truthful, given the ongoing issues, he would wonder often if humanity can make it through and learn something from the past atrocities that occur. Both Andrew and I wrote that our father had been wonderfully content, active, and independent in his last years. He was continually writing, though never finished, a work entitled The Holocaust and Its Aftermaths, A Window into Human Nature. He would often say, given the ongoing terrible and horrific happenings in the world, that he sadly did not hold out much hope for a species that continues to be so barbaric to its own kind. Yet he was looking forward to this new edition of his memoirs with the Azrieli Foundation, proud that his story would continue being a testament to the atrocities of the war and continue to foster Holocaust education. He was quite the sports fan, too. He loved the Jays. He knew what the pitching rotations were. He cheered for the Toronto Raptors. He wasn't into hockey so much after the WHA left. We had great years of running to the old barn when we scored not only our regular season tickets, but other season tickets as well. And he was so intent and so involved in the game, even though we were sitting together, I'd often have to push him back into his seat so I could watch as well, because he would just be like this, even though you're up in the whatever. I would also say that when our mom died, what do we do with Dad? Should he come down to the States? And he was never going to leave Winnipeg. He's a Winnipegger. Winnipeg meant so much to him and my mom, and the arts and the diversity just fit them, amazing. A good friend Michael here says that Winnipeggers don't leave home unless they're needed someplace else. I have some stories about that too. But I think some of the most important qualities for my dad and for our family is that we're from Winnipeg. That he was so happy that this was his home, and the relationships that he had, really sustained him. That badminton community. If it wasn't for that badminton community, I don't know that he would have been, he wouldn't have gotten to 96, kept him agile. And I think that we're also so thankful, being trained in this healthcare system and working through things, that having connections and just, the great care folks that we had, helping him try to do the best that he could. His neighbor and really, family, Judy Warrior and Leon, Val Warrior's niece, when Val died, Judy said that the rabbi at their service said, it's not tragic, when we lose these giants, these heroes, because of the amazing lives that they've led. It's sad, but it's not tragic. He had a great run, and he knew when it's over, it's over. It was his time. To have him at home until the end, he deserved that, Many thanks to everyone who sort of helped, with support and thoughts, prayers, and even visits, to spend time with him when Andrew and I were so far away, or we just couldn't be here as much as we wanted. So I wanted to just maybe open it up, a little bit for folks to shout out a few tales of the old timer. If you'd like to share a few things, and then I might close with a few tips and final words, unless there's other things you'd like to share. Anyone have a story about my dad? Of when you met, or art, or whatever. I mean, he was so involved, Hello?
Pumpernickel bread.
Oh, pumpernickel bread. Oh, that's right. Okay, yeah. Judy, is that? Yeah. Yeah. So I'll just say, city bred pumpernickel. I was weaned on that. My dad would often. Now apparently Judy likes rye, and my dad would sort of leave some pumpernickel, but I don't think she's so much pumpernickel. But that was sort of, there's always frozen pumpernickel, and I tend to go back to Minneapolis with 36 loaves of pumpernickel, because my kids now, I've spoiled them, they won't eat anything but city-bred pumpernickel. So I don't know that my journeys up here are going to be so frequent. So if there's a pipeline, coming down to Minneapolis, I'll be willing to meet you in St. Cloud to pick up a few, but he loves city-bred pumpernickel, and it's the manna from heaven, although I guess during Passover we take a break with that. Yeah. Blaine, did I see you get up a little bit?
Yeah, I know it's not part of the Carter family tradition to do a funeral service, but shortly after Stefan passed, we held a memorial badminton tournament. There's even some of the tournament shirts left, but it ended up being the largest badminton tournament ever held in the province. 163 participants over 3 days, so it was really nice to be able to take a few days to share some memories and to reminisce about the times we spent playing together. I've got another friend from the badminton community here who was instrumental in keeping Stefan healthy and happy, and even in our club of 70 people, he knew everyone's name. He knew everyone's spouse's name. He knew what you did. He knew your kids' names. And just a lot of great memories from the last 10 years where I was privileged to know.
Yeah. I think he's more than 35 years, or he's been playing from the River Heights to the Seven Oaks. I mean, he'd tour the city for badminton. Wasn't my forte. I was just sharing that, anytime Andrew and I would come up from Minneapolis to play, he'd take us out, drag us out to have a game. And it wasn't until years later that I realized that the racket that he gave me was loosely strung. And I realized that I had been had. I don't think that he can play this, I think that was overtly done. And it wasn't until Blaine showed me what a real badminton racket, I'm going, oh my God, But he had a pretty wicked short game. And I'll just say that even all through the pandemic, he would do badminton, shadow badminton in sort of the house with those hex balls where he could whatnot, and hearkening back to, I think, youth, he was a big ping pong player early on. We'd have these battle royals in the basement with screaming and things that I could never beat him, darn it all, But he loved that community, and really, both Andrew and I are so thankful that you guys would, step up and have an old timer and keep him occupied and not throw the bird so far in the back and take pity on him sometimes. So, yeah. Anyone else?
I think, Phil was another
Well, I just wanted to add on to what Blaine was saying, that I used to, I guess Stefan used to be kind of my student, and I think he was just so kind and humble, and he was very unassuming as well, he didn't want the story to be about him, or like obviously he kind of stood out because of his age and he'd be walking on courts and stuff. But I just think it was very inspirational because like he really enjoyed the game, but not only for playing, but the community aspect of it, and he really believed in like the activity prolonging your life and your quality of life. And not necessarily just badminton, but it's just so important to have those kind of activities where you feel engaged and you're active and you're moving your body like you should be, right? So because it's that's what we're supposed to do, right? And building those relationships with new people, right? And meeting new people and just and when he'd ask me questions, or he'd ask me questions, or like how to improve his game, I always keep thinking back on mine of like, you already won. You got out of bed and you went outside.
Yeah, there were some times he would, I think, be playing in the senior tournaments, and he'd have to actually play down an age group because there was no one. He won a bronze medal just by showing up, And I'll also say that when you said that he sure stands out. How should I put this? He was attached to his attire, and it rarely changed in spite of me trying to upgrade his sweatsuits and whatnot. And I believe that he still has a shirt of mine that dates back to when I speed skated in 1967 for the River Heights Cardinals that he would still use. So, the thing about him too, in a sense that it didn't matter what people thought of him. Or he had to make an impression. He was just who he was. Yeah.
I was going to tell a little story relating to your dad, but really relating more to the importance of publishing his story and some sort of gratitude to the Heritage Center and to the Azrieli Foundation. And so at the office we have a bookkeeper comes in once a week on Thursdays. And I don't know him all that well. All I know is on Thursdays we talk about the Jets usually. But I'm pretty sure he's not Jewish and he's not a doctor and he didn't play badminton. So as it happens, just last Thursday, sort of expecting the Jets discussion, and he says to me, do you know, and he knows I'm Jewish, he says, do you know Stefan Carter? So I said, well, actually I do. And so he started talking, he wanted to talk to me about your dad's book, and he said that he had read your dad's obituary. I wondered, how did you find out about the book? And he wondered if I read it. I hadn't. So I said, well, how did you even know about it? So he said, well, he read the obituary in the newspaper, and he thought it was an interesting story, so he went to the library. He got the book, and he had read it pretty thoroughly. So we had a great discussion. A lot of it was new to me, but it was sort of new to him too, and he was commenting about the terrible experiences your dad went through. And so I was sort of thinking about it, and just such a great thing that he had written a book and had it being published and it's available, and other people all kinds of backgrounds would be able to read about it, learn about the different Holocaust experiences. So,
It was just shared that there was a friend and colleague at work, just repeating just for the hearing about who wasn't Jewish but related to a good friend of ours, and asked, do you know Stefan Carter? And he hadn't heard of my dad. He wasn't Jewish, but he read about the obituary, and he went and got that book himself. And there was this sort of quite an interest of someone who really doesn't share the same culture about how important that story is, or our stories, or any stories of overcoming just horrific, tragedies in life. And I think that's the sort of part of the shared humanity. We all have our stories, and they have value, and it's amazing. I would say that one of the things that comes back, on and on about how did my dad survive? And it wasn't through cunning, or it wasn't through this. He said he just had luck. And it was also because of the kindness of good people who did the right thing. I was thinking about that and that theme, and actually that's why I still have a brother. There were good people yesterday who were kind and did the right thing, when he did his swoon. So I think the life lesson is about just being kind to each other and taking care of each other. Yeah.
I had the privilege of being with your lead dad just when I was a girl cop at our Holocaust meetings, occasionally. And being what we are as Jewish people, we all get very, very excited. And here was your father, and this very calm voice, reasoning very, very eloquently, bringing us down to earth until we got excited again. Once again, calming us down, always the most appropriate, most eloquent comments. And I'm grateful to him.
Thank you. Thank you.
I put three of your dad, and one year I said, how would I come over to Sager? Our house came over. I was a little concerned that maybe he would his racket. But anyways, we had a great time with him, and he was very interesting gentleman, and he tried to tell us what happened, and he bought his book, and it was very interesting.
Sometimes when you get him started, he would go off on these tangents, and the stories would end up going on stories and stories and stories. And I was pretty fortunate. I mean, this, the pandemic was just terrible. I mean, we couldn't get up here for 2.5, 3 years. Before his accident, and I'd brought my kids up. They got to sit with Grandpa Stefan, my 15-year-old and my 13-year-old, and amazing moments for them to know the history of their grandpa in a place when years ago they were probably a little too young and just wondering, is time running out, with that crazy pandemic. It was just terrible, But in some ways, you do the best you can through the, sharing the stories and staying connected. It's amazing how you can stay connected with phone calls or whatnot. It's sort of the lifelines to each other, I might share one more story, but anything else or maybe a couple?
I would meet Stefan sometimes for lunch at Bernstein's or tea or coffee at the Polish Museum. And he would tell stories, I would listen, I loved learning from him. But it always made me laugh because he would say, have you heard of the recipe of blah, blah, blah? I'm like, no. And he'd say, you haven't? Well, you have to go listen. Have you read this in this book? Do you know this book? No. You don't? Have you ever been to so-and-so museum? No, I don't think so. Well, you have to go. I hope I'm Googling all these things, I'm learning all these things, I'm putting all these pieces together, that I haven't connected before. And then I'm getting emails from him sending me new things to read or listen to. And it's just, again,
He prided himself on being this recluse, just wanted to be, and wanting to be, not so engaged, but it's interesting for my brother and I to sort of hear, and, when I would go to the badminton places or the places where he run, and he would just sort of light up. I'm going, who are you, and what have you done with my dad? It's just a completely different person sometimes, or maybe we just bored him, I don't know. That he thought that, well, we've heard all his stories before, and, we had heard all of his stories. before. I'll mention one thing. A few years ago, someone asked me to sort of give a talk about the lessons of the pandemic and surviving and how do you cope. I give sort of some talks. I'm a palliative care doc and have a few good themes that I can share. And someone had asked me about survival strategies for the pandemic when we were all cloistered in and couldn't go anywhere. And I thought, gee, why don't I know a Holocaust survivor who practiced that, and what kind of tips would my dad have about, well, how did he survive? And I could share with you, the Doc Carter's life strategies from the Warsaw Ghetto about how he did or what message he actually gave me for this sort of lecture, And the things that he shared when I asked him, how did you survive the Warsaw Ghetto? He said, when stressed, afraid, or in discomfort, consciously breathe in and out and follow the breath. He was so into Jean Cabot, Zen, and all that, and just breathing. Just follow the breath. Be grateful to be alive. Tomorrow is promised to no one. Find a way to move and play. Read and read and read and read more. Think of others, talk, hug, connect, and support each other with stories. Be fully immersed in joyful, replete, and curious hours in whatever endeavor or project that interests you. So if there was sort of a few life lessons that my dad would want to leave, I thought that might be some of the important things from how he managed, and even how he managed through the pandemic, and even as he was struggling to manage through the last number of months. And he did amazingly well considering everything, It was a good run for him. And he was okay. It was his time. We sort of knew when he loved Mozart so much, but then he switched to Chopin. So, can I take a selfie with all of you guys? One for the brother. And any other final comments, I'm happy to. So maybe give... And maybe I could just leave one last story. Is that okay? I'm sorry? Yep. Yeah, Phil. Phil. Oh, I'm sorry, there's someone behind. We'll do a couple more, and then I have one more. Yeah. Phil.
I just want to reflect back to 2 years instead of all of Dr. Carter, because in a way, when you were talking, it reminded me of my time with him in the office. I started with Dr. Carter in 1979, vascular clinic, St. Boniface Hospital. I was just a kid. I had no experience in medicine. I had no university education. I was just eager. He saw something in me. I'm getting goosebumps right now. Through an associate, he asked me to come in and visit him in his office. He offered me a job as an apprentice in the vascular. I would be on a 6-month probation to see how I liked the job, how I fit. I never worked with people before. I was thrust into this magnificent man. I was blessed to have been with him. Something was magical about it. He confided in me, and many times, Joel, in the office, he would call me in and we'd have talks. He treated me like a son, I'm sorry. But he always talked about his sons. He was so proud of you, so proud of Andrew. Joel, he's in Europe, he's running cross country, he's doing medals. It was ongoing all the time. And this is the kind of man he was. He was such a professional genius, but yet he was so human. He was just so down to earth. And his patients loved him. And I'm still working. I'm at the Grace Hospital in the Basket right there. I still see patients from 30, 40 years ago. And they ask me, hey, do you remember Dr. Carter? Yes, I do. Very, very firmly remember. I'd just like to say that he was so proud of you boys too.
Thanks.
And your mother, I think she had a crush on me.
Oh, no, she did. She did. No. She, Phil, I worked summer with him a couple of summers in my dad's lab. Don't show up late. And he's a great pianist, and my parents loved coming to hear you. They spoke about you, maybe even a little more than me, but we don't have to get into that. Yeah. Just.
Thank you, Joel.
Yeah. What?
What year did you learn to take blood pressures in the vascular diet?
That would have been, I think that was when I was, I was a class of 91 in medicine. It was before then, maybe the late 80s. Yeah, late 80s. I worked with Phil. There were lots of pressures. I'll just say my dad's lab was one of the only labs in Western Canada that did penile blood pressures, So he was a leader in that field. So anyway, I'm sorry, there was one other I wanted to share too. Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to ask you what flowers grew in your front garden on Elm Street. Do you know?
Well, I think there were bleeding hearts an awful lot.
Exactly. But there was one other. Forget-me-not.
Yes. Yeah.
Those two have always stayed with me, and they grew in my garden
Oh.
after I was invited to meet their older abundance.
Yeah, my mom always gave the bleeding hearts away. That's our family flower, the bleeding hearts. So, yeah.
The other thing I was going to mention, my mother is almost 103.
Wow.
I first met your parents about 2001 at the Wellness Institute, and we were friends ever after. But my mother makes fantastic
Fantastic.
fantastic.
Oh, okay.
And Dr. Carter is not a sweet, loving man.
No, he's not. He's not.
My mother went out every single seasonal celebration of Christmas, or whatever.
Yeah.
The celebration time of the year. I would deliver a 7-layer iced peanut butter. And of course, I think you may have enjoyed them.
I think I probably had more slices than.
Also saved them for dinner.
Exactly.
Because they kept forever in the freezer.
That's right. No. So thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
And I just love meeting him. He would come out to the car. The other thing I was going to mention, the city of Winnipeg was closing the Cornish Library for the 4th time. It was coming to the 90th celebration, 90 years. And I made the call to some friends we met at the University Women's Club, and on until I commissioned a painting celebrating suffrage and celebrating the Carnegie Cornish Library at 100. That's hanging now after the library was closed for a while and renovated. The painting is in the library. And your dad, I was almost near enough to pay for it. And I had a little bit to go. And before I knew it, his checkbook was out. So what I have for you, and I'm sorry your brother's not here, but maybe you'll get it to him. I made cards of that painting. And there are 12 suffragist people, men and women. And actually 2 with nothing but fun are born in Iceland. So I've got 2 Icelanders. We just, I had no idea they were coming, but their father, Dr. Jacobson,
Yeah, I remember. Biochemistry.
yeah. So anyway, 54. So I have these cards.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah.
I just want to add one more story, well, 3 more quick stories. Where we had, the first one has to do with the pandemic. So at the beginning, when we started to need masks, who had masks? And he wrote me and he said, I have a person who can get masks. Do you want a package of masks? And I said, sure. So I came over to pick them up, and he showed up at the doorstep. He had this very long implement of some kind with a hook at the end. And he had the packages of masks for me. The second one is like going back already years, he would, we would set up some kind of a phone discussion, but he would say, but you can't phone me between this time and this time because I'm doing meditation. And then I'm doing my exercises, so you can call me after that time. And then finally it was the badminton. So anyone that knows me well, that I was a gym teacher's worst nightmare. There is not a single sport that I can do without really embarrassing myself. But he insisted that he would teach me how to do badminton, but I said,
Very brave.
I said, really? I said, no, I didn't. I said, you don't understand. I can't. And I listed all the things that I tried and couldn't do. But he kept on trying, right?
Badminton to the end, right?
Absolutely.
That's exactly what it was.
And really, I think it was just maybe last spring when we were back in the office, and he came to play at the Rady Center, and he had all of his equipment with him and everything, and I just looked at him, and Stan and I both looked at him and thought, oh my God, this is crazy, you're still playing badminton, but he was. So, and I wanted to also add that any time we spoke, he spoke about the 2 of you. He was so proud of you, and he would tell me all about the things you did, and it was just so wonderful to hear. I'm just so honored to have had him in my life, and I want to thank all of you for coming. There's some treats that I guess he wouldn't have liked, desserts.
We would have had some pumpernickel bread.
And the next time that I come to Minneapolis, I will definitely bring pumpernickel bread. There are books out there on the table. Please help yourself to 1 copy so that there's enough for everyone. And I just want to thank all of you for coming, and thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thank you all for